Welcome to another episode of the Captain's Table. I am your guest host this week. I am Mike Gatto, former California state lawmaker. And as you know, the main hosts of the Captain's Table think it is a kick to have people who are usually interviewed, namely people like me, become the interviewer. And the cool thing about that is I get to choose who I interview. And today I have chosen to interview the illustrious Bruce McNall. Bruce, welcome to the Captain's Table.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I don't know. I'm not sure I'm illustrious. If not, maybe it's a different word for that.
Well,
infamous may be better. How's that?
I don't know about that, but I have to give it this lead in for people who might not know who you are. We have a lot of young listeners, a lot of people who are Generation Z and millennials and stuff like that. And I always give this lead in when I describe you. This is whether it's an interview or whether it's, just to someone in person. Now, you got to promise me you won't get a big ego. But
okay.
Folks who know me know that I've been in politics on and off for about 30 years. And I've met everybody. I've met everybody of both parties. I've met President Clinton, Gavin Newsom, all the people that people are regularly cite as being the most charismatic people they've ever met. When people ask me, they say, who is the most charismatic person you've ever met? And, the way that I define charisma is that certain something. Somebody can walk in a room and immediately own the place. Someone can walk in a room and everyone wants to talk to that person. Guys want to be the guy's friend. Ladies want to do something else. I always say that the most charismatic person I've ever met is Bruce McNall.
Well, that's quite a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've met everyone, from I've met several of the last presidents and all the people out there that people routinely cite as being the kings of charisma. So, folks, that's who we have here today talking with us. And we're going to talk a little bit about his fascinating life. And it has been very fascinating. So I'll give a little bit of an outline and then I'll get right into the questions. So, Bruce was born in the Los Angeles area. At a young age, he became a prodigy for trading ancient coins, which is something that I care about quite a deal. And he was able to parlay the funds he received from trading coins to the rich and famous to actually buying the Los Angeles Kings and bringing A-list stars like Wayne Gretzky and Luc Robitaille to Los Angeles and putting hockey on the map. After he owned the Kings for a while, there was a fall from grace. Bruce, was convicted of some federal crimes, which we'll talk about, went to federal prison, met some interesting people, and that's things in a nutshell. But Bruce, I think everybody in Los Angeles still remembers you as the guy who made hockey cool.
Yeah, well, it was obvious that hockey was not popular. I was a fan, but nobody ever showed up for the games. It was easy to get in because you just walk in and that was it. So, but LA is a star town, and I knew that. And I knew that the only star that anybody would know was Wayne Gretzky. So when I bought the team, I started bugging Peter Pocklington, the then owner of the Edmonton Oilers, where Gretzky played, about a trade. He laughed me off, and you give me a whole team, I wouldn't take it. I said, I'll give you the whole team, no problem. Huh. And he said, no. Finally, in June of '88, he decided that he needed some money. There were problems. Gretzky's contract was nearing the end. He feared he was going to lose him for nothing. And he contacted me. He says, okay, I need $15 million cash right away. I need draft picks. I need players. I said, okay, fine.
Well, let me interrupt just to give the listeners some context. I mean, when you first called him, right? I mean, he must have thought, who is this guy? I mean, because people who are used to the LA Kings being a household name and, being a respected team, they have to remember that this was not the case back then, right? I mean, at that time, the LA Kings were very much an outpost, right, of hockey in a sport that was perceived as, Canadian, right, or something like that.
Well, yeah, it was an outpost, but again, because I was an owner, there were only at that time 24 of them, so I was one of 24 people that the owner of the Edmonton Oilers knew. I was sort of well known at that time. enough that and he realized that LA needed that kind of thing. And so eventually he decided to take it seriously, and we started the negotiations, and I ended up getting Gretzky, which was a miracle. And as you say, not that I thought of it at the time, because I was thinking of it at the time to help improve our team, make it a winner, add seats to the place, add an interest in the sport where people would come. I didn't realize it would have the huge national effect it ended up having. No clue to that.
When he initially made his demands to you, and you're on, for lack of a better word, the first negotiating phone call, did you hesitate for even one moment, or you say, "Where am I going to get all this stuff?" Or did you know in your heart you were going to go forward with it?
We had to do it. Period. So yes, yes was yes. I wired him the $15 million immediately. Wow. Subject to the other agreement. So I made sure I had him on the hook, at least. And then it became what happened. Unfortunately, after that was that he let it over. He gave it over to his general manager, Glenn Sather, and Sather said, "I don't give a goddamn if you own that team or not. We're not trading Gretzky." Period. So that became a problem. And I told that to Peter, and Peter said, "He doesn't own the team. We're going to do this deal." So eventually, Sather and I began to discuss it. And at that time, I had 3 all-star rookies in Steve Duchesne, Luc Robitaille, and Jimmy Carson. And he wanted Luc Robitaille. And I kept refusing. And that was a big stumbling block until finally I convinced him that Jimmy Carson, who had just scored 50 goals, the highest scoring American player of all time, would work. And they finally agreed to that. Amazing. But it was a long series. And then I had Gretzky in my corner because Wayne did not want to be traded. He had no interest. And I told him at the time, if Wayne doesn't want to do this, I'm not doing it, because there's no point in me, trading for a superstar who doesn't want to be in LA. And Wayne and I had known each other for the last year or so that I owned the team. And, we were friends. He would come to LA. He had a girlfriend at the time, later became his wife, Janet Jones. And he lived in LA. And, we hung out, had dinner and so forth and talked. And I kept bugging him. "Hey, Wayne, I'm going to get you one day." "No, you're not. Don't worry about it. Not going to happen. See you later." And then finally, I called him, which, of course, is not legal. But did that ever bother me much? Not, you know me enough, Mike, to know that that's not a big issue. And it's called tampering, but I didn't care. So I went ahead and I told them that you're on the block. They want to trade you to me. He didn't believe it. And one day, Wayne's in my office, and Parkinson called me, and I put him on the speaker. So Wayne heard the whole conversation. When he hung up,
wow,
he said, "Okay, I got it. I'm an LA King now." And that was that. And then from then on, he became my, in essence, general manager to help me with the trade. He was the one that said, "I need to get Marty McSorley from them. I need to get Michael Krushelinski, and don't give them 3 first-round draft picks in a row, stagger them every other year." He came up with all these thoughts, and that ended up what happening, exactly what Wayne suggested.
So let's start at the beginning, because now we've introduced to the viewers one of the pivotal moments in your life, but I'm sure that a lot of people listening to this are probably wondering, how did a middle-class guy from Arcadia get to the point where he was wiring $15 million without thinking twice and owning the LA Kings? So we got to go into that a little bit.
Yeah.
You grew up in Arcadia. Were you an only child, one of several?
No, I had a younger sister.
Younger sister.
Who later on became a lawyer and lives in Washington, D.C. her whole life because she was general counsel for the FAA.
Oh, that's right. I do remember that.
Yeah. So what happened was, I grew up there, and for some reason, I was always a big reader, and I loved history. And one day, I collected stamps and coins, but things that cost 50 cents or $1, that kind of thing. Okay. And one day, I went to a coin shop, and I saw a couple Roman coins for like $1 each. I couldn't believe it. And so I bought them, and I bought the basic book about the coins. I got fascinated. And in in a matter of about a year or two, I was about 12, 13 years old now, I began to know the coins well enough that I could go traveling to coin shops and see if they had any ancient coins. And of course, what they did, they had no idea what they had, no idea the value. So I'd buy them, and I put an ad in the LA Times saying, send for free price list of ancient coins, which I mimeographed. That's a device that people don't know anymore. But I mimeographed the thing up, and I mailed these off and began to sell ancient coins.
And by the way, for people, I can always tell whether someone has a chance of liking and appreciating ancient coins and whether they are someone who likes and appreciates history by that same litmus test you just talked about, which is when you tell someone that you can get a basic, common, lower condition Roman coin that was, minted by, in some cases a notorious or famous emperor, and was likely minted to pay the Roman legions when they were fighting blah blah blah. I mean, there's coins you can get that were minted by Constantine, the first Christian emperor, that were used to pay his legions when he was fighting under the banner of Christianity for the first time. And you can get one of these coins for $20 or $40. If someone looks at you with wild excitement in their eyes and they get really happy and really amazed, then that's someone who loves history. And if they don't, then I mean, I don't know what to do with them. But that's always a good test.
Well, that was it. And basically, what I did, I told the stories. As opposed to just having the coin, I would tell the buyers the story about the coin and where they came from and how they were minted and where they were minted. It gave a bit of a history of the emperors themselves or the place in which it was struck. And I thought by giving that information, it would add romance to the whole thing, and it did. And as a result of that, the business, when I was a kid, began to grow. I was about 14, 15 years old. I'm doing about $1,000 a week.
Wow.
Which wasn't too bad. My father's a professor of biochemistry at USC, and he had no clue really to what was going on. He just wanted me to be a doctor or something. And, so I just kept this business, and finally I ended up working for a small coin company in Arcadia, a store in a strip mall. But I had my own, and I worked for free, but if I could put up my own ancient coins. I started doing more business in the little ancient coins in that little shop than they did in all the other stuff that they had. And again, built it up slowly, and eventually came to the point where I was, I ended up going to UCLA with the idea of becoming a professor. And as I was doing that, I began to meet some very powerful people, especially in the entertainment world, through one of my professors named Bruce McNall. And from that, I met these very wealthy guys. I excited them about ancient coins in the same way as you described. And they started buying, and pretty soon I'm doing, a few $1 million a year.
Wow.
And I realized that the $20,000 a year I'd make as a professor probably wasn't going to work anymore.
Was it going to support the lifestyle, huh?
No. So I quit that and went full time into the ancient coin world, and built that business up to with major auctions every year. I had partners with Swiss banks, Bank Roy and Credit Suisse and others, and built up the business by introducing it to brand new people that had never experienced this before.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is I vaguely remember that because from my vantage point, right, I mean, all this was going on. I was a young man, whereas, my father was loosely interested in this and other objects of art that, were brought out of these countries. And I've always had a fascination with ancient history. That was my major in my undergraduate degree in UCLA. And so, it was, before I ever met you at a political event, I had heard of you more from the coins than from the kings, which I think is hilarious. And,
hilarious.
But I mean, so I have to ask, so let's talk a little bit about the business, because there are aspects of the business that must be fascinating for people listening. There are coins that, for people who don't understand, the art world and the antiquities world, it's all about provenance. There are certain things that you cannot get out of countries anymore because of treaties. Pre-Columbian artifacts from Mexico, certain things from Turkey, Greece, and Italy. You really can't get out statues anymore and things like that. Well, at least you're not supposed to, right? But coins are a little different because there are several of them, and it's kind of more difficult to prove provenance. But at the same time, you had to have an endless pipeline for these coins. And there are some coins, I should say, again, there are some coins where, you had Sir Cyril Grant or somebody like that who, was some British explorer who went into Egypt in the 1880s and, dug up some coins, and you can trace them to his estate. But the reality is people are still digging to this day and still finding coins to this day. And I want to talk about this side of the business now, which is, how did you get some of these coins out of the country? Tell us a good story.
Them. I mean, basically, first of all, it's totally legal to bring these coins in the United States. At least it has been. Most recently, some DA in New York has decided to pursue this more. He basically did this for the antiquity trade, which has been a problem, and then he expanded that to coins. So now it's a problem with coins too, slight problem. But as you point out, the proof of being able to prove that a certain coin came from a certain place is almost impossible because coins are traded, from England to India.
Yeah, they found Roman coins in Vietnam. They found Roman coins in Scotland. I mean, they found them all over in places that were not necessarily part of the empire.
Right. Yeah. So it's hard to but the bottom line is, when coins were found, yes, it's true that for the most part it was very important to me to get what I'll call, coins that are as fresh as possible, because that's where your biggest profit is. And, when I was young, I did it myself. I would go in and to Turkey or to Italy or Greece, find the dealers who had the coins. And again, what happens is that, a typical farmer or a person building a building comes across a hoard of coins. They take it to the local dealer there, coin dealer, whatever, sell it to them, who are the middlemen, and then I would deal with them and buy the coins there, and then basically just take them out because nobody cared. There was no, when I was young, there was not any checks of any sort.
But hold on. I've got to pause because again, the viewers, the listeners are fascinated by this, as am I. Anytime I start, breaking this down, there are many, many different components to it. So, you're a young guy. You're in your, late teens, early 20s, and and you now are flying to, Europe and the Middle East. And you go to the coin dealers, who might have a shop on High Street and they're selling antiquities or minor, coin shops or whatever. And, you go in there and you've got to say, hey, listen, I've developed a great market in Los Angeles, California. I've got some well-heeled buyers. I'll buy anything you've got. But at some point you've got to say, hey, connect me with your sources. And doesn't that guy get a little protective? I mean, does he want to connect you with his sources?
No, they will not. They will not do that.
Okay, so you got to buy from the middleman.
I was able to locate them myself at times, but generally speaking, no. And in certain countries, specifically Turkey and Italy, where I began to know the sources quite a bit, these are dangerous people. You're dealing with something akin to the drug business. Yeah. Because it's illegal.
Right.
And so
and I should be very clear. I mean, in a lot of these countries that have ancient history, there's been a problem for 2,000 years with grave robbers, right? I mean, people who essentially go into, in Egypt more it's grave robbers, right? But in, Italy and whatever, it's people who sometimes will, excavate a site without respect for the site, we'll call it, right?
Yeah. So it's been an issue. But the bottom line, when I was a young guy, I didn't care about that. Within a few years, when my business got very big, I didn't do it myself anymore, but I had plenty of people working for me who had traveled to these countries and knew the language quite well. And I had a big partner who's a very famous guy named Bob Heck, who was probably the most notorious dealer in ancient art and also coins in the world at the time. He spoke multiple languages. He was heir to the Hex department store fortune, which later became May Company.
Wow.
And he was the most knowledgeable person I knew in the business. And, and he was also very, very tough. And I'll use the word dangerous. So, for example, when I would meet a guy like, some of the big guns in that business, in Italy especially, these are mafia guys, bottom line, because they have to find a way to get to smuggle the stuff out. And they're all
now, Bruce, connected. We all know the mafia doesn't exist.
No, only you. Only you. I mean, nobody's ever checked you out very carefully, but I have. And I'll tell you that Michael Francis told me all about you and the family, so it's okay.
Oh, boy.
But yeah, no, it doesn't exist, but tutto mafioso, they say, huh?
Right. So you meet these bad guys, and like,
you get friends with them, you know. Yeah. You're friends with them. They're bad guys in some ways. They're dangerous in some ways. If you screw them, yeah. But if you're honest and dealing with them up front, and they're fine. Then they're just normal people like anybody else, and you just have to be careful not to do something stupid. And it's exciting too. Let's face it. I mean, you're dealing with buried treasure basically, and all of a sudden something is coming out of the ground that nobody saw before. Or things are found that have enormous historical importance, like the famous coin issued by Brutus with the two daggers on the back and the Liberty cap with the words "Ides of March," on the back.
And for those who are not familiar with this coin, this is a beautiful coin minted by Brutus, one of the primary assassin of Julius Caesar, who, everyone's familiar with the phrase "Beware the Ides of March." Brutus actually put that on the coin. His coin says EIDMAR, Ides of March, and and he literally, unless I'm mistaken, he minted these coins to pay his legions, which were fighting the forces of Mark Antony and so on and so forth, Augustus, the future Augustus. And this coin was extraordinarily valuable, right?
Yeah, well, they probably didn't mint too many of them for reasons I don't know. It may have been that coins that he decided to mint and give to his generals or his top people. We don't know. There are about 48 known in the world, and there are 2 gold coins.
Wow.
I of course owned both gold coins, and about over the years maybe 20 of the silver.
Wow.
The gold Royai at the time in the mid 70s, I sold for over $1 million each. Today,
and by the way, but we should also jump in, and we should tell the listeners that it's also a possibility, and this contributes to scarcity too. In ancient Rome, it's no different from the modern United States with a few modifications. When somebody fell out of favor, they were canceled. They that's the modern term. But when someone fell out of favor, they literally would. It was called damnatio memoriae. They would actually, remove their names from monuments. They would deface their statues. And I think it's entirely possible that, because obviously the Caesars faction won out and became the emperors, and they, in theory, they were all descended in their term from, the original Caesars. It's possible that people just melted these coins because they thought it was bad luck to have them. This is the guy that killed Caesar, right? And so they're incredibly rare.
Incredibly rare.
Yeah.
And things like that, that are, for example, just recently, I'm not exactly sure exactly where, but in Syria somewhere, a hoard of petrograms, these are little larger sized coins, were found of Antony and Cleopatra.
Wow.
And there about 30, I think, were found. I'm not sure how many, because nobody's going to tell you. The people that find them kind of piece them out a little bit at a time, So we don't know exactly, but there's been several in the market in the last year, I would say. And these are great coins because they have the portrait of Mark Antony on one side and the other side Cleopatra.
Wow.
And how do we know what Cleopatra looked like? Only from the coins. There's nothing else. There's no paintings, nothing.
Yeah.
So if you look at Cleopatra, she's no Elizabeth Taylor, I can tell you that.
Yes, I was going to say, to use a euphemism, she's a handsome woman. I mean, she's...
Yeah. She's a pig. She's a dog. So, let me put it more bluntly, okay? But you wouldn't believe it. But anyway, but but this horde came up. I'm sure it was a horde because several are coming out of the market, and they're obviously just, the surfaces. You could see from the surface that they've been recently excavated, and it was sort of exciting. All of a sudden, you have a coin which before this horde there were maybe 20 or 30 of them in the world, and now there's double that basically as a result of this find.
Wow.
In Syria.
Now tell us an interesting smuggling story, because again, I want to paint a picture for the listener. So, you're a relatively young guy. You're obviously an American. You go to one of these countries. It could be Turkey, it could be Syria, it could be Egypt, it could be Italy, and you met with some unsavory characters, and they sell you a coin that you think you could sell back in the United States for $500,000 and $2 million, whatever, because I know you were getting some very, very good prices back then.
Yeah.
So now you're heading to the airport. You don't know if you're being followed. You don't know if they're going to tip the customs guy and then they're going to take the thing back and split the money. You're heading to the airport and you've got this coin in your luggage. You approach the X-ray security. Do you toss it in the little plastic thing?
You
like
pay them
with
a couple $100 and you say, I've got some stuff in here. I got some things in here that are fun things. Here's a couple $100. Let me through.
Wow.
Every country did that.
Wow.
There's not a custom official. Well, you should know from the government you were in, the corruption runs rampant, right?
Yeah.
And certainly in those kind of third world countries, not really third world. I mean, I won't call Italy third world or Turkey even, but still they're, in those days especially, nobody cared. They didn't care. And as far as the danger factor of the other guys coming through, again, Bob Heck and my people were also dangerous. Let's put it this way.
I understand.
So if something happened, I would, and there are times in the past that things did get out of hand a little bit, and there were and problems ensued, and I never had a problem myself as a result of it.
So, do you want to share? Do you want to share that reference? Do you want to explain a time where things got out of hand?
Some of the people that work for me, or indirectly work for me. These are people that lived in the areas, and they would search out coins, and my people would go and buy them from them. But they're territorial, not unlike the gangs of today.
I see.
And so what happens is, there are times when some of the people I got the coins from entered into areas they shouldn't have. Specifically, in one case, there was a guy that dealt in the Calabria area, which is southern Italy, and he went down to Syracuse to buy some coins there in Sicily, where he's not allowed.
I see.
Well, he never found it.
Wow.
Okay. And my people, Bob Peck specifically, and others, notified the people that who they thought may have been responsible for this, that if this ever happened again, they would have a serious problem with their family.
I see.
And that usually shut them up. And
that had the side effect.
Yeah, I had that. Yeah, again, I personally didn't do much of that kind of stuff at all, but I had enough people around me that were capable of making threats. They were not idle threats either.
Yeah. Although I do remember at one point, I asked my father, how did Bruce gets the coins out originally, and he said he put them in his socks. Right. And so I don't know if that's totally apocryphal. I don't know if we're talking about much smaller scale and, less valuable coins and stuff like that. But,
the antiquities for me were a bigger problem, because I was in the antiquity business too. I had one of the largest dealerships in the world of antiquities, and that included bronzes and marble sculptures that weighed 2 tons. And believe me, getting things out of those countries that, are 2 tons was a lot more difficult than getting little coins out. That was, not nearly the issue. So it was, you had to figure out who to pay off, basically, because in those countries, again, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted to do if you had the money to do it.
Yeah. And by the way, a lot of these stories are told in more great detail in the book you wrote called It Was Fun While It Lasted. Fantastic book.
Yeah.
I read it cover to cover, could not put it down. It's available on
Oh, thank
Amazon
you.
for people who are curious. Go to Amazon. It's called It Was Fun While It Lasted by Bruce McNall. And it really, there's some fascinating stories in there.
Oh, thank you.
About
Thank you.
some of the antiquities. So, okay, so you've built this business and you're selling coins to very, very wealthy people, Hollywood producers.
Yeah.
I know David Geffen was a customer of yours.
Yes.
You start living the high life, and at some point, we're back to you buy the Kings, and you bring Gretzky to Los Angeles, and now you're also dabbling, right? You're producing movies, is right on the side, right? Is that right?
Yeah,
around that same time?
I started the movie production thing way before I bought the Kings, because the people that were buying coins from me, the producers and stars and so forth, always would bug me. Hey, we're buying coins from you. How about doing a movie with us?
Huh.
So I started in '79, and I began producing films, and things like the very first film, oddly enough, was not a big hit by any means. Called Brimstone and Treacle. It started Sting, because Sting was one of my buyers, and he asked, he wanted to make this movie in the worst way.
Huh.
I thought it was a terrible script, but I said, okay, it was a couple $1 million. We made the movie, and and so that's how it started. And then from then on, I formed a company, and we made things like Mr. Mom, Blame It on Rio, Fabulous Baker Boys, Weekend at Bernie's, and it was just maybe 20, 30 movies at the time.
Okay, so here's a couple quick yes or no questions. Did you make money in the movie industry?
Ultimately, the answer was yes and no. I made it at times, and then in the later years, later on, I was so busy with the Kings and so busy with that stuff, I ignored it, and I basically gave it over to David Beagleman, who at that time was very famous. He was the chairman of Columbia Pictures, then became chairman of the MGM United Artists. He was a big gun, and Kirk Kerkorian, who owned MGM at the time, there was a book coming out about a scandal involving Beagleman, and he told me, "Hey, if you hired David, you need somebody to run that company. I'll pay a salary for the first year, and you can take any film you would like from our library to produce." And so I said, okay, and I hired him, and we made the film I picked was a film called War Games, which did a huge amount of business. And but when I began to focus mainly on the Kings and things of that nature, my heart was never in the movie business. Never was really. It was always.
I thought the proper answer was, I made some money, but the tax authorities think I lost money. Right?
That's well, ultimately, what happened was that Beagleman was, the banks in those days would lend money. It was the '80s, and everybody was flush with dough. Reagan economics was on, and banks were lending money right, left, and center. The entertainment business was a big deal, and these bankers would love to be able to come to the big events I would host, or the Kings games, and sit and hang with the movie stars that I brought there and all that kind of thing. So these are bankers making $30,000-$40,000 a year at the most, and they're hanging with movie giants and athletes and all that kind of stuff. So they began to borrow. We've been borrowing a ton of money, which I ended up at the time not even focusing on it, but I was guaranteeing all those loans.
Wow.
And Beagleman was spending the money just like crazy. I mean, just huge amounts of money for overhead and everything else. And again, I wasn't focused. So it was my fault because I didn't focus on the company at all until I was told eventually that, oh, by the way, you'll $500 million.
Oh, wow.
Oh, hello. Hi.
That's a lot of money now, and was a lot of money in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So,
which is what, on a side note, the funny thing that Trump said to me, who I knew somewhat, and I always thought he was an egomaniac, so, I didn't do any real business with him, but he, one day he says he wanted to go to the Kings game. I didn't own the Kings at the time. We were in the playoffs. And so I said, okay, how many people? He said, I don't know, 4 people, whatever. So I talked to Robitaille, who at that time still is the president of the Kings. So I said, yeah, you're all set up. we'll get you a suite, and it'll be with some lawyer friends of mine who you'll be, you'll be happy with. And he said, okay, great. You go to the suite, and he says to the whole group of lawyers in there, he said, Bruce really screwed up. And they all laughed. I said, of course, we all know the story, what happened to him. No. He said, he screwed up because he only borrowed $500 million. I borrowed $10 billion. The banks, I own the banks now.
Yeah.
I tell them what to do. Not they can't shut me down. I shut them down.
Yeah, and Donald Trump was paraphrasing. I forget who made that statement originally. It's like, you borrow a medium amount from the banks and you can't pay it back. You have a problem. You borrow a whole lot from the banks and you can't pay it back. They've got a problem, right? And
exactly. That's what he was paraphrasing. Exactly.
That sounds like Mr. Trump's philosophy with so many things, right? I mean, it's
so many things. Yes, exactly.
Listeners, you are listening to the Captain's Table. We will be right back after these commercial announcements. Welcome back to the Captain's Table. Today we have as our special guest Bruce McNall, and I have been thoroughly enjoying this, and I hope everybody listening has been as well. And we're going through, we've gone through so many different parts of his illustrious career, and we're going to get to, some of the things you talk about in your book, It Was Fun While It Lasted, where you start to talk about, when things turn bad. But there is one thing I want to talk about that happened before that I think is one of the most fascinating episodes in American history, because it involves something that is right out of a movie. It involves a reclusive, somewhat fascinating billionaire who had a plan that was like right out of an Austin Powers movie. And this, of course, I'm talking about the Hunts and their plan to corner the world's market on silver. So Bruce, will you tell us a little bit about the germ of this plan and how you became involved? And of course, I will interrupt and interject and ask you various questions as you go.
Well, Bunker Hunt, I first met. One thing we hadn't discussed is I was also in the thoroughbred horse business.
That's right.
And very successful in that.
Well, by the way, and give us, let me interject right there. I mean, give us, who's the most famous horse you owned or had a piece of?
Well, I won the Arc de Triomphe, which is the biggest race in the world at the time, twice.
Wow.
I'm the only person who ever won it twice.
I did not know that.
And
for folks listening, this is like the Kentucky Derby in France, except it's even bigger.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, even bigger because it's worldwide and it's a big deal. And so I won that twice, for example. I had many, many horses that won major races. People always ask me, do you ever have a horse in the Kentucky Derby? I said, never. I would never have a horse in the Kentucky Derby, because if I had a horse in the Derby, I would have sold it before that, because it's never going to be worth more than what it is to get there. If it wins, it's only going to be worth what you were gone for. If it loses, you got nothing. So just unload it.
That's funny.
But so I had a lot of horses at the time, and one day I'm in my box at Santa Anita racetrack, and I got in the horse business because I lived in Arcadia, which is near Santa Anita. In Santa Anita racetrack is in Arcadia, right, where I grew up, and a lot of friends of mine were sons and daughters of the trainers and race owners. So I thought, if I ever made any money one day, I'd like to buy a horse. That's how it started.
Sure.
So it turns out that in 1980 or 81, I was leading the nation in earnings. I had a major horse called Track Robbery, who became the champion racehorse of the year. That in 1981, I think it was. And one day, this guy comes and sits in my box, and I'm looking around. And I'm like, "Hello," and he says, "I just got a question for you. I own a lot of racehorses, and how the heck did you become this? How did this happen? How did this work?" And I said, "Well," and we talked about it a little bit, and then he said, "I have another question for you. In the ancient world, what was the ratio between gold and silver?" I said, "Generally, it was 24-1. That is 24 silver coins of the same weight, equaling one gold coin, more or less, most of the time." He said, "I know you're in the coin business." I said, "Yes." Anyway, he walked off for a minute, and I said, "Who the heck is this guy?" So he turns to somebody nearby, and I said, "Who is this?" That's Nelson Bunker Hunt. He's simply the richest man in the world. And he was at the time. And I said, okay, interesting. So he sits down. He said, you're interested in coins? And he says, well, I'm interested in a little bit. So anyway, long story short, he became my biggest buyer of ancient coins, spending hundreds of millions of dollars in those days, in the early 80s.
Wow.
And bought the greatest coin collection ever formed to this day. By far the biggest coin collection. Wow. And we became friends. We partnered a huge number of horses together. We traveled together. The families knew each other. Everybody was very close. And then one day in 1979, he's telling me, I don't trust. He was very conservative. He was very right wing, which is not me at all. I was the opposite. But we never discussed politics. And so he said, I don't trust the American dollar. I'm buying silver. I said, oh, okay, interesting. So he was buying and buying. One day he comes to me and says, hey, I want you to buy some silver with me. Well, I didn't have much of a choice because he was buying so many coins. What am I going to say? No. I said, okay, sure. I thought to myself, what's the least amount of money I could put up with him? This was 1980. I said, maybe $1 million. So I gave him $1 million. I said, here, Bunker, invest that for me. So anyway, we see the market, and the market's going up and up and up and up and up, mainly because the Hunts are buying. The Hunts and a guy named Naji Nahas from Brazil, who ran the Arab money, were buying. And it went from when I first bought it for like $8 an ounce, it was like $45 an ounce now.
Wow.
So I went to Bunker. I said, Bunker, sell me out, man. This is great. Thank you so much. I said, I made like, 8 times the money. He said, no, you didn't. I said, well, what do you mean I didn't? He said, well, we bought futures. So you made 20 times that amount.
Oh, jeez.
About $200 million. I said, okay, sell me out, please. Sell me the fuck out.
Yeah, I've got a date on a beach with a Mai Tai in my hand for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
See you later. And so anyway, but at that same time, then all of a sudden the government, our dear government, came along and decided that to make it illegal, the CFTC did this, to make it illegal to buy silver anymore. You could only sell.
Wow.
Incredible stupidity, but they did it. So obviously the market began to crash.
Yeah.
And it went down, 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 and it was locked limit down. You couldn't get out because there was no buyers.
Wow.
So
and let me just jump in because, I hear a lot of times people say, oh, we live in free markets. No, we do not live in free markets. Even under, Republican presidents, we don't live in free markets. There were also times where, I think during the pandemic and also during the great financial crisis, where the government banned short selling. So when they wanted stock prices to go up, they banned short selling and stock prices went up. When they wanted to mess with this guy who was, trying to corner the world's silver supply and they wanted to drive prices down, they simply said, you can't sell it, right? Which is just amazing.
It's amazing what
I'm sorry,
what
you
they
can't
did.
buy it. You can only sell it.
Can't buy it.
Prices. Yeah.
And what happened was the Hunts were oddly. There's a misconception that the Hunts were trying to corner the market. In fact, that wasn't their mentality. Their mentality was that we don't trust the American dollar. We want hard currencies, and that's what they were buying it for. But it turned out, of course, the result was they did end up trying to corner the market because when you're buying as much as they bought, yes, they did corner the market.
Wow.
And it became a real mess. And now, so anyway, the market went down. The Hunts were nice enough to get me out at about what I paid, so I didn't lose any money. But they were losing a fortune. And it brings me to a very interesting political thing. I think I mentioned in the book. I'm not sure how much I went into it.
Yes, you did. I don't know that you. I think you named some names, but not all.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the names. I'll tell you the names.
Okay.
So what happened was that it came out that the Hunts needed to borrow over $1 billion. In those days, $1 billion meant a lot of money in 1980.
Right.
So today, everybody's got $1 billion. The waiter's got $1 billion, but in those days, that was not the case. So, they set up a loan with a big Texas bank, and at that time, the head of the Fed was Paul Volcker. And Paul Volcker decided that he did not want to approve that loan unless Congress approved it. He was nervous.
Wow.
So it needed congressional approval. Bunker comes to me and he says, what are we going to do? Because I'm viewed as right-wing, terrible guy, all this stuff. I said, well, let me see what I can do. So I called John Tunney, senator from California. And I said, and who was a big buyer of coins too for me. I said, John, the Hunts are not this radical, crazy group. They're not this. They didn't do it for those reasons. This is an honest thing. See what you can do. Well, okay. So he went to his best friend, a guy named Ted Kennedy, who at that time was chairman of the banking committee. And he went to a guy named Ben Rosenthal, who ran the Equal Committee in the House of Representatives. And they said, okay. And then Tony says to me, but we need $15 million each. I said, okay.
Wow.
Let me see. So I go back to Bunker, and I said, Bunker, it's $15 million each. And he said, okay. So I became the middleman where Bunker wired me money to an account I had, set up something in Cayman Islands, and everybody got paid.
Wow.
And I also got paid $15 million for it, by the way. But,
wow.
But anyway, people got paid. And, I don't know. I only paid Tunney. I don't know exactly if he paid all those other guys off and who else got paid off. I'm not positive, but, but John, even when he wrote his biography, he said the most money he's ever made is as a, quote, investment banker, so he calls it. Okay, with me.
So he was.
So
he was connecting. He was connecting people for a different type of thing, which unfortunately sounds like vote peddling.
A little of it, But he had lost at that time. He had just lost the Senate seat to a guy named Hayakawa, and so he was no longer a U.S. senator. So I guess what he was doing, he felt was fine, and maybe it was fine. I don't know, but anyway. That's what happened.
Yeah, and possibly spreading the wealth, possibly not. But but certainly
again,
using his connections in the Senate to get it done.
Yeah. So the Hunts got their loan. They ended up being able to, get their way out of the mess. And the Beaufort Sea in Canada, which they own the oil rights to, which is where they were trying to borrow the money from, became a big hit, and they became fine.
Yeah, and again, for context, I mean, the Hunt family, the Bunker Hunt's father, H.L. Hunt, according to some people, was implicated with the Kennedy assassination. Again, according to some people, never been proven.
Yeah.
He was very involved with the John Birch Society, which was then one of the premier right-wing organizations in the country. And of course, this is 1979, 1980. They actually proved to be right because, they said they don't trust the dollar, inflation. I mean, and, people right now are complaining about inflation because it's going between, 3 and 8%. I mean, in 1981, a mortgage was 14%, folks. I mean, it was ugly. I mean, inflation was so bad in 1981, and the price of gold ended up skyrocketing in 1981. I mean, it was just through the roof insane.
They were right.
I'm not sure that those levels have ever been reached, on a real basis since then. But
no, I don't think so. And they were ultimately right, and then did what they thought was the right thing to do. It was a fascinating time for me. I can tell you that it was an amazing moment when you're dealing with, the politicians at the highest level I did at the time, and people that well connected in that space that were able to make things happen, and to get a $1 billion loan approved, in Congress, which was not an easy trick. So
absolutely fascinating. I want to get to the next phase of your life because it's also fascinating, and I'm going to preface this by giving people a little lean up. Most people listening, they've gotten a mortgage or they know someone who's gotten a mortgage. Most people listening are aware of the fact that, God, up until 2008, you could walk into a bank and say, hey, I want a stated income mortgage, which means you're going to tell them on the honor system how much you make and how much you've got. And they're going to maybe just tweak the interest rate a little bit higher, of course, but they'll give you a loan. And that was one of the causes of the great financial crisis in 2008. But still to this day, people who apply for mortgages, they might say that their second home is worth a little more than it is. They might say that, they've got more life insurance than they have. And the banks are supposed to check this, but they don't always do so. The reason why this is relevant and to this lead up is at some point you're owning the Kings, you're making movies, you've got a great life, but at some point you ended up going to prison. And to really just bring it down to brass tacks, and I'll let you tell the story, you went to prison essentially for the same thing that millions of Americans have done every day when they apply for mortgages. Is that right?
Yes, or a credit card. If they apply for a credit card or any kind of banking arrangement. The answer is yes, but on a larger scale. And also, at the time, my criminal lawyer said, the banks were instructing my people what to do. They were basically saying, don't worry about it. Because I would say, we don't have those assets we had. They're gone down. There's nothing there. They just said, oh, no, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it, was the banker's attitude. Because, again, these are guys who enjoy the lifestyle that I helped provide for them. And they didn't want any problems. They didn't want any issues. They thought that I could fix it because I always had fixed things in the past. I've always fixed things.
So, essentially, you were applying for loans to, manage the Kings, to keep the Kings afloat and stuff like that. A lot of your assets were ancient coins, which are hard to value, right? And they were basically saying, well, you said this Greek coin of Ptolemy Soter was worth 2.5 million, and it's only worth 1.9. And you served how many years in federal prison for this?
Just under 5 years.
Wow.
Just under 5 years.
5 years in
federal
prison.
But at the same time, my criminal lawyers said this, although they argued with me about going to trial. The problem with me I took a deal because the deal at the time was if I went to prison, there were 40 people that were under indictment in my case.
And they wanted you to tell on all of them, right?
Mainly lawyers, mainly accountants.
Right.
And some other big-time lawyers were under suspicion that probably would have got indicted too. The deal was, if I pled guilty, they would all walk.
Wow.
Some would have to plead guilty to a felony, but they would do no time.
Wow.
The ones closest to me. And and then coupled with this, so that was an issue for me. And then the other issue was that although the argument was made by my attorneys at the time about what the banks had approved it, in fact, they not only approved it, they orchestrated it in many cases, that, that they're held accountable. Well, that may have been true, but in my mind, it became like a 16-year-old girl that says, yes, I want to have sex. It's still illegal.
Yeah.
So even if they wanted to do it or approved it, it's still illegal. And that was the case with the banks. The banks may have said, yes, let's do this or do whatever, but what we were doing is illegal.
Yeah.
And so that's why I decided to go ahead and plead out, do the time, and let everybody else, not have the problem. And
now I know why Michael Francis loves you so much, because in a lot of circles, this is what's called a stand-up guy. You lost 5 years of your life so that these other guys would not end up going to prison, and that had to be hard.
Well, in some ways, to tell you the truth, it was not fun. I'm not going to tell you that it's a good idea to go to prison, but at the time, I was under so much pressure before going to prison the last couple of years, so much economic pressure going on, and responsible for hundreds and hundreds of employees, and responsible for the fans of Los Angeles for the Kings to make sure that the team would win and be the team that they wanted. There's a lot of pressures. When you go to prison, you have no pressures anymore, except to figure out, how to get to the chow line.
Yeah. I can understand that. I remember you saying that in your book. It was fun while it lasted. You said that, in a weird way, it was a relief at that point because of all the pressures you were under in your life. And
also you learn things about people, because I was very fortunate, in part probably because I did plead guilty and helped everybody else that way. But in general, that I found that, when you're on top of the world, everybody loves you because they need you for something.
Yep.
So, everybody's kissing your ass. When you fall like that, then you see what happens. And in my case, virtually everybody stayed so loyal. I mean,
like Michael Eisner still took your calls, right? I remember you saying that.
Yeah, Michael Eisner took my calls. Here's the chairman of Disney, of all people.
Yeah.
And I had people like that coming to visit me. Robitaille would come to visit me every other week in prison. Gretzky would come constantly. Magic Johnson would come. I remember Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell came on a Friday when you didn't have any visiting rights. It was only weekends. But the guards didn't care. They took them all around, showed the whole place. I didn't even know they were there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because again, in an interview, people can't always see the gleam in your eye and the strut in your walk and the interpersonal charisma that I referred to at the very beginning of this interview. But reading the story about how you came to, I don't know how to describe it, how you came to own the prison. And I've heard these stories from others too. So it's not just from you. I mean, I've heard them from several people.
Yeah.
But I mean, you go to prison and before you know it, you're essentially running the place, right? I mean, you've got, I mean, you were accused of like basically hypnotizing all these guards and they're doing your bidding. You've got an easy job off, not even in the prison. I mean, tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, again, these guards they're straight out of, they come from like the managers of McDonald's. They have no money, they have nothing. So all these celebrities coming to visit me, they would love to meet them and get autographs, and Gretzky would bring them a dozen sticks. Constantly this happened. And so the guards therefore would they would help me wherever I could, They got me a job on the Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is a real cherry job, and they have restaurants there, and hotels and everything.
And you're dining with generals while you're doing time, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, exactly. So it was kind of it was nice that way until the day came when people call there's a group of people called SIS, which are the people that are the policemen for the guards. They are the ones that check the guards out, who kind of put two and two together and figured out, okay, so they put me in the hole, and they wanted me to give up the guards that are dirty. So I remember this agent came and the FBI came too and asked me who did this, who did that. I would say, well, let's start with you. Okay, let's start with you. That didn't make them happy.
Yeah.
So of course I'm not going to sit there and tell them who's involved with that kind of stuff. They figure it out on your own, or it's not your. So I spent 6 months in the hole.
Oh my God, that had to be awful.
If I knifed somebody, or killed somebody, you get 3 months.
Wow.
But I got 6 months. It was pretty bad. Even Robitaille would visit me in the hole, which meant they had to shut down the entire prison to allow him to come across to this little space. So it was amazing. And but eventually they decided that they had to let me out, so they did. But I became from being low level security to being a quote threat to the institution.
Jeez.
So it was nice to be a threat to the institution of a federal government agency. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
I felt like like Tim McVeigh or somebody.
But that had to be hard, and that had to be the second time where you refused to rat people out, and you got punished for it.
So they ended up shipping me all over the place.
Well, and that's what I want to get at next, because I mean, and forgive this reference, I'll tell you where I'm going with it. I sometimes joke that you were the Forrest Gump of the federal prison system, not because you were stupid, not at all. It's because you sort of had this weird thing where you were in the right place at the right time, like in the movie, where you got to meet so many fascinating personalities within the federal prison system. Timothy McVeigh, right? The Oklahoma City bomber, Michael Francese, right? I mean, tell us about all the personalities you met while you were in federal lockup.
Well, you had all different kinds. I mean, in the lower level places, there was Marvin Mitchelson, the famous lawyer who was in there for some tax deal, who I had to save his life because he kept wanting to change the channels of the TV. And the TVs at that time were run mainly by the African Americans because That's just what they did, because there was only two TVs in the prison, which is one was English, one was English speaking, and one was Spanish speaking.
Right.
So the black guys like to be in the, and they watch what they want to watch, movies or reruns and stuff like that. And Marvin would change the channels, and the guys would come to me. The black guys are all friends of mine. They would come to me and say, "What's this dude? You got to take care of this guy. Tell him what's up." So I did. I kept telling them, and finally they were about ready to deal with him in a much more harsh manner. So I had one of my big knucklehead Aryan white guys knock him out, put him in a bed so he wasn't going to get hurt.
Wow.
And I kept, when he finally woke up, I said, "Marvin, this is what's going to happen. You just can't do this anymore. Done. You're finished." So he finally did, behaved himself. That was the end of that. But there was guys like that. Michael Francis, I didn't actually meet in prison. I met him after that. But we knew many of the same people in prison, because when I was in the hole, he was the underboss to the
Carmine Persico, right?
To Carmine Persico, and Junior Persico, they called him, but he was in the area that I was in the big federal prison in Lompoc at the time.
Wow.
And so, with multiple murder convictions, God knows what else. Yeah. And then they started shipping me again all over the place. I went to Phoenix, which was interesting because they had at that time another couple mob guys, and they were segregated in another building, but there were always gunshots from a hill that they would try to pick these guys off.
Oh,
so it was kind of funny because these shots and this and that. And then later on, I was in. I went from there. I was in Oklahoma City. I was in Leavenworth. They sent me, God knows, every place possible, and I ended up in Milan, Michigan, which is 30 miles or so south of Detroit, which is the oldest prison in America. Jeez. And it was about 1,300 black guys and me and a mob guy. That was about it.
Wow, that's crazy.
And it was fun. It was great because they all knew me from sports. I own part of the Lakers as well. I own the football team in Canada. They all do that. So it was great fun. I mean, I would teach classes and help them out wherever I could. And all they cared about, is if I could help them getting their songs published, their rappers and so forth.
Wow.
I had at that time I had no access to it, so I had no clue. But it was an interesting experience. And like you say, what I learned is that wherever you are, you have to live the best you can wherever you are, whether you're in a prison or the hole in a prison or living on the beach in Malibu. You are where you are. Make the best of it.
That is great advice. Advice advice that I intend
really
to.
About all you can do. It was also nice for me because when I got, Gretzky refused to have his jersey retired until I got out. I could join him. Wow. Here's the greatest player in the world, whose jersey is retired throughout the entire league. His number 99 is not usable on any team, on any place, and he wouldn't have it retired, so I got it and could join him, which I thought was
fantastic.
Great.
That is very indicative, I think, of the loyalty you inspire with folks you know. So here's the last question. It's one that I always ask people, particularly people who have some degree of self-reflection, and that is regrets. I think one of the biggest blessings that a person can have is to live a life without regrets. Do you have any regrets? Are there any regrets that when you look back, that things that you wish you would have done differently?
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure, I would have. Obviously, I would have paid a lot more attention to what was happening in the film business that ended up bringing me down in total. I would have paid much more attention to those issues. I probably would have been not as. I think I would have been more attentive to family. I think at the time because I was running around all over the place with the sports and the movies and everything else, and didn't have as much time, I think, for my kids at the time. They would probably disagree with that. They think I had plenty. I don't think I did a very good job with that. I regret that. I don't regret the whole. In a way, if I had to do it over again, would I do it again? It's funny. There was the Globe and Mail, the big newspaper in Canada, national newspaper, had a thing many years ago that said, it had a poll that said, would you do 5 years in prison and have Bruce McNall's lifestyle? 98% came back and said yes.
Yeah, and by the way, our mutual friend Steve Markoff, right? I mean, we were talking with him about this. He says that at some point he told you, "Oh, come on, Bruce, you can't say you regretted any of it because this was your nature, right? This was something you had to do. You had to live this life. This is you. This is part of it." I mean, I'm probably butchering. He probably said it far more eloquently, but
yeah, well, but, yeah, it's something it's my dear friend Paul Anka said, who wrote the song, for Frank Sinatra. I had a few regrets, but not many.
Yeah. Regrets I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. Yeah.
Correct.
Well, that is wonderful to hear, and I can report that, of course, everyone who knows you loves you, and we are particularly appreciative to you for coming on this podcast. Thank you so much, everybody.
Absolutely, Mike.
Check out his book on Amazon. It was fun while it lasted. Bruce, you're an absolute treasure, and we adore you, and thanks again for coming on the Captain's
Thanks,
Table.
Mike. Thanks a lot. Happy to be there. Anytime for you, man.
Thank you.
You got it.
You are listening to the Captain's Table. We'll be back next week with another episode.